Well, it's good to be here with Industry Minister Kim Carr on an important day for the future of Australia's defence industries, defence infrastructure, our national security and the priorities for Australia's long-term future. You've heard me say many times before, I'm about building Australia's future. That means building the industries of the future, building the jobs of the future, building the schools and hospitals of the future, building a clean energy future for all Australians, and to ensure also on top of that we're getting our key infrastructure decisions right as well. Whether it's a national broadband network, whether it's high-speed rail, planning for the future, or the planning of our future needs for our defence infrastructure across Australia. This is a good day in terms of making the big calls on the future of our defence infrastructure bases. You can either sit back and simply allow events to overtake you, or you can plan ahead. And what I have said quite plainly today is that we're a government which believes in planning ahead. Planning ahead to make sure that we have the bases ready, the naval equipment ready, the defence assets ready to deal with the contingencies of the future. You see, in Australia, the vast majority of our operations for our naval assets and our military assets lie to our northeast, to our north and to our northwest into the Indian Ocean. And that's why, in the pattern of Australian defence planning, going back for the last 20 to 30 years, we've seen step by step, brick by brick, the movement of our defence assets, our defence infrastructure north. And that's been important, to be close as possible to fields of operation and to be close as possible for fields of embarkation for Australia's military forces as well. Our land forces based at Enoggera, our land forces based at Laverack in Townsville, our land forces also based at Robertson in Darwin. And putting these assets together over time is where all sensible long-term government planning goes. That's why when the government deliberated on the Defence Force Posture Review, we're very mindful of its recommendations. And its recommendations on these questions are very important. The Defence Force Posture recommendations, recommendation 14 was that Defence should commence planning now on long-term options for establishing a supplementary East Coast Fleet base at Brisbane for the future submarine and large amphibious ships. This work will complement the development of options for embarking forces on amphibious ships in Brisbane in the shorter term. And there are other recommendations which are relevant within the Defence Force Posture Review, and these all go to the future location of Fleet Based East. When the government deliberated upon these, we believed that the right thing to do was to make sure that the right planning processes were in place so that when we look out to 15 to 20 years' time, we're not simply operating from behind the curve. We are ahead of the curve. And that is what good long-term planning is about. Now, that's why the decision today to establish this naval task force to plan the implementation of the long-term relocation of part or all the naval assets from Fleet Based East to Brisbane, Townsville, Cairns, Darwin, Broome or HMAS Stirling off Perth is the right planning approach, step by step, methodical, involving our defence hierarchy as well. And that is what we're about to do. Within 24 months, the defence hierarchy will report through the committee established under the Task Force for the Navy. This will provide us with recommendations on the operationalisation of this plan, as well as its timetable, as well as the costings associated with each step in the process. We're not talking about a landing point here short of 2030, 15 to 20 years' time. But if you look at the depth of investments necessary long term to have our defence infrastructure in the right places across Australia to serve our future defence needs, we've got to make sure that that is done thoroughly, properly, in a considered manner. So in our long considerations of this matter as Cabinet ministers in recent weeks and in recent months on this subject, it's been the clear resolution on the part of our colleagues and myself that this planning process needs to be operationalised through the Naval Task Force, which I've identified. Furthermore, when you look at the economic and defence industry opportunities, they are great. For here at Garden Island behind me, It may well be that our Naval Task Force recommends the continuation of certain of the naval assets and operations here. It may well be that they recommend what naval assets are then located in Brisbane, Townsville, Cairns and the rest. Also, further opportunities for jobs and economic development here in Sydney at Garden Island lie with a range of possibilities, including the cruise ship industry. I've noticed some criticism this morning from Premier O'Farrell on this subject. I've got to say that Mr O'Farrell seems to have a very short-term memory. He was saying not long ago, in fact only last year, that the cruise ship industry here in Garden Island needed more and more access to these facilities here. More and more access, more and more berths. There were cruise ships tied up here, in fact, just the other day. Well, there's a basic mathematical problem here. We've got more naval ships being developed, which need to be berthed here. More and more cruise ships, who Mr O'Farrell says have to be berthed here. There's a limit to the real estate available here. That's why you need to plan this ahead. So in terms of the economic opportunities for the people of Sydney, and the other opportunities for the people of Sydney, and those working at Garden Island now, number one, our Naval Task Force will make appropriate recommendations on which assets remain here, both in terms of industry and in terms of naval units such as those behind me. Number two, which should head north and which should head west. Number three, we'll then look at what other uses aspects of this freed up site can be put to it. Open green spaces like the ones we are currently enjoying here near Lady Macquarie's chair, but also on top of that, the appropriate preservation of heritage buildings here as well. Not to mention the massive economic potential represented by the cruise ship industry in the future. I'm told that the cruise ship industry at present contributes something like $500 million to the Sydney economy. Well, there's a constraint at the moment, and that is every cruise ship being built in the world at the moment can't get under the harbour bridge. They're that big. And most of them can't be berthed over there at the terminal at Circular Quay because they're too long. Therefore, where do they go? And if they're not coming here, they're going to be going elsewhere in Australia or elsewhere in the world. So we've got to work closely with all the industry participants, the defence industry participants, to make sure that all these jobs are properly supported into the future, including any support and transition of jobs to other locations north, that the infrastructure work is undertaken with appropriate industry buy-in from Australian industry, and those jobs are actually provided here in Australia. Other industries which make possible future use of the site, including the cruise ship industry, which is a massive revenue earner for this city. And I note again the massive contradiction between what Mr O'Farrell seems to have said this morning, on the one hand, and on the other hand, what he said just 12 months ago, which is he wants more Garden Island real estate for cruise ships. Our job as the national government is to make the big calls for the future. And the big calls here lie in making sure that we've made proper planning provision for where we need to be with our Defence Force and our Royal Australian Navy by the year 2030. We've supported the acquisition of major capital ships for the Navy, the LHDs, as well as air warfare destroyers and other units. The Navy belongs to a proud tradition in Australia. It's a great Navy. We've got to make sure that it's properly positioned and forward-based in the future. So before I ask the Industry Minister to supplement my remarks and take your questions, let me just conclude with this observation. The priority the government has is to make the big calls on the future of our economy, the future of our defence industry and infrastructure, and the future of our jobs, whereas Mr Abbott's priority continues to be cutting jobs, cutting health, cutting hospitals, cutting schools, all to pay for his number one priority, his unaffordable and unfair paid parental leave scheme.